Now, it's been called the natural order of Earth. Species are born, and in the blink of an eye, Earth is full of life, all in perfect harmony. Along with all the plants and the animals, humans are born into this marvelous system as well. And just like that, humans are ready to roam the Earth and experience life on this planet. But like as in the natural order of life, all living things must come to an end. Death is inevitable. Now, some fear death while others welcome it. It's estimated that some 500 to 750 million people believe that when you're dead, you're dead. And conversely, there are billions that believe otherwise. Now, one thing's for certain, we all will die. But do we really die? Or do we go to some other place and continue to live on? Join me while I sit down with these amazing people that died, but came back to talk about it.
I remember he was a very big man, and I remember him leaning into me, and he could tell that I was not okay. I knew that I was dying. They carried me in, and the look of the pastor's eyes, I remember him standing up and he slammed his fist on his desk. And he asked me if I believed in God. I said, I believe in God. And that's when my spirit, that I call it, my spiritual self, left this shell, this physical body. When I left my body, first I was on the ceiling, and I was looking down and I was watching the paramedics work on my body and put me into the ambulance. And I knew at that moment, well, that's really nice. I'm glad they're doing that, but I'm not coming back. I just had this knowing. And it was almost, instantly of having that knowing that I wasn't coming back, that I remember feeling this presence on my right side and looking up, and that's when there was a tunnel. And the tunnel at first was dark for me. Very rapidly, it went to a completely light-filled tunnel. And it was filled with so much love. It's so hard to put into human words. The love that was in that tunnel, it was almost an energetic feeling propelling me at this supersonic speed. For the first time, I felt like I was alive. I was really alive. It was incredible because I had had so much pain up until that moment that I took my last breath. But when I took that last breath, it was the most wonderful feeling. And it didn't contain me. I was so much more than that shell on the floor. I had no desire to go back in. I was done. I was checking out. I still knew I was Erica McKenzie. I knew that was the human me, but I knew this was the real me. If all that happened to me was that, at that point, I would have stayed in that tunnel of love and light forever. It was more than enough. It was more love than I'd ever felt to that magnitude as a human on Earth.
I was close to 3 years old. In the patio there was a tank, and this tank was in a corner, and it was a big tank. It held around 900 gallons of water. And we decided, let's play catch across the tank. I bended my legs and I was leaning very precariously at the edge of this tank. My sister threw the ball at me. She didn't apply enough force. And when I leaned forward to try to grab it, the ball rolled on the surface of the tank and I fell into the water. Probably was about 30, 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So the first thing I felt when falling in the water was the sense of being frigid cold. I also realized that I could not breathe. So the sense of feeling cold plus the sense of not being able to breathe brought me to experience a moment of absolute horror. At that age, I didn't know that if you fall into water, you drown. We had never been in a pool. We didn't have a bathtub. So at that moment, the sense of terror was very, very profound. I could hear my heart. Imagine the state of anxiety, the state of horror. My heart was beating very loud in my chest, like a bass drum, boom, boom, boom. And then just like that, it stopped, and I was in absolute silence. But something happened. While I was experiencing this state of absolute terror, I went from that to experience absolute peace. It was just like that. I went from horror to a state of absolute well-being. I didn't know what happened, but I was experiencing the sense that I didn't need anything. I didn't need to fight anymore. I just was in the state of peace.
I get to the end of the tunnel. I can see what looks to be stars and a galaxy. And then I felt this presence that I had known as a child. I recognized the presence, and it was so spectacular. I could not even look upon it. I knew it was God. And while I didn't see a physical form at this point of God, I could feel as though God was putting his arms around me. God and I stood there, and I'm looking in front of me, and there's all of these stars. It was so incredible. I have this overwhelming feeling of love. And all of a sudden, God and I begin to communicate. And it wasn't anything that I was used to communicating like on Earth. It was telepathically, meaning I would think this thought, and as soon as I thought it, God would replace it with an answer. And as this dialogue was going on, and I'm being filled with answers to the questions that I'm asking, and I hear this whirring noise, like an old antique projector, and I see on the screen 3, 2, 1, the life review of Erica McKenzie. And I proceed to have this life review with God. Everything that I had lived from that day that I was born until that day, 31 years, human years later, that I died. And the events that happened in this life review were events that what I like to call humanly significant accolades, if you will, things that we as human deem important in our life. I remember losing my first tooth in first grade, winning the spelling bee in third grade, cheerleading awards, sports awards, newspaper, yearbook editor, going on to college, graduating from college, getting married, having children. All of these things were amazing experiences and memories that I'm living. But there was this theme, and I have this human reaction of, wait a minute, I haven't seen anything negative. And I know I'm a sinner because I was raised in religion, which I'm thankful for. It was a tool. I can see and appreciate it for what it was. But at the same time, I had this huge fear of dying because I knew I was a sinner and I knew I was going to go to hell. And I certainly knew I wasn't perfect. But why wasn't God judging me? Wasn't that what was supposed to happen? Well, we get to the end, the day I died, and God still had not judged me. God had only loved me. I have this incredible feeling that I'm home and I never want to be parted from God and this feeling again. I had never felt this kind of love, unconditional love. And all of a sudden, in front of me appear eyeglasses. Now, mind you, back then, I had perfect vision. But here's this pair of eyeglasses, and they are the size of a small car. And I'm thinking, there's no way. I knew that God wanted me to put these eyeglasses on. But I had the feeling I'm still the size I was on Earth, and these glasses are the size of a vehicle. It's not going to work. As soon as I'm thinking that human thought of limitation, I found myself putting my hands and picking up the glasses and drawing them near, and wouldn't you know, as soon as I got them on my face, they fit perfectly. And I remember God saying to me, with God, all things are possible. And with that, I heard that whirring projector noise in my ear again, like the first time. Countdown begins. 3, 2, 1. Life Review of Erica McKenzie, and there's me on the screen, a baby again. I remember how my heart felt like it was pounding through my chest, and I felt like I was losing my breath because I was starting to panic. I now had the realization I'm having another life review, and I am such a bad sinner. I've messed up so much that God has to give me a separate life review just for all the bad things that I had done. So I'm feeling this panic because, you see, I have God's glasses on now. So everything that I started seeing was not at all that was in the first life review. The first life review was everything that mankind deems as important, significant. But the second life review was everything that God knows is important.
Before I went to that space of absolute well-being, was a space that was absolutely dark. I had my eyes open and I only saw darkness. But right there, when I went to experience this sense of well-being, a light came from the bottom. And that light, it was soft, but it was enough to illuminate my whole watery surrounding. So this is incredible because it's what I call the silence behind the silence. And later in my life, I crave for this silence. Being in this atmosphere of silence and light, suddenly I started to see bubbles suspended in the water. These bubbles were surrounded by light, and I started to chase these bubbles. And it was chasing these bubbles that I turned around, and it's when I saw a body suspended in the water. And right there, I knew that this was my body. And amazingly, I didn't feel fearful. I did not feel even surprise. It was a sense of familiarity. It was the sense of like, oh, this already happened to me before. I turned around and I started to see flowers that were blooming from nowhere. These were the most beautiful, beautiful flowers, and the sense of dimension also disappeared, and I was picked up by these flowers. And I put the analogy that for me it was like the sense that you are going back to the womb. That sense where you don't have to do absolutely anything. And then again, in just a flash, I appear in my mom's path. And it's when I said, "Oh, that's Mom." And right there, she stopped. She did not hesitate. She did not give another step. She just stopped. She knew immediately that something was happening at home. My mom is incredible because she's always been so intuitive, and she listened to her intuition. And she just decided to turn and started to run back home. She knew something was happening at home with one of her babies, and she just ran. I looked at her and I was like, "Oh." But I got distracted at that moment by the realization that wherever I put my mind, I could go. So if I would see a dog at the end of the street, I would be there. If I would see a tree, people. So it was like, now I was having fun playing a game of going places. For me, time and space had vanished, and I could be anywhere at any time. And right there, again, just like a flash, I appeared in a realm that was made of pure, bright, intense, shiny light. And Greg, for the first 3 years of my life, this was the first time that I felt that I was home. Of course, there's no 5 senses anymore like in the human body. So everything turns more into what I would describe as a knowing. Instead of going with the 5 senses, I would just call this the spiritual sense. Is the knowing, experiencing things at a higher level. In this realm of the light, I didn't really see anybody or hear anybody. I felt so welcome. I just felt that I was home. And it was again the sense that no time had happened, no 3 years had passed. It's like, oh, I was just out and now I'm back. Again, it was this sense of familiarity. And then, although I saw my body suspended in the water, up to this point, I did not have the realization that I was not Ingrid, that I was not that persona. And this was the moment when I realized I am not that. And I saw myself, I realized myself as a being of light. And it's when I started to have the sense of pretty much dissolving with the whole, becoming part of the whole. And this went even farther because I experienced what I call the sense of non-self. It's that place where I was experiencing just pure consciousness and just absolute presence. Some people feel afraid about the word of nothingness, but I said, no, it's the nothingness that encompasses everything.
Life Review of Erica McKenzie, and there's me on the screen, a baby again. I didn't even remember most of these things. Things like, when I was little, I was sitting on the lap in the rest home of this elderly woman. I was brushing her hair, and I was singing, Jesus Loves Me. And there was this love energy exchange between she and I, this gift. Then I was helping like a homeless person. I didn't have any money, but I gave my last $2 to this homeless person so they'd have something. Rescuing animals that, were abused, listening to a friend, or even a stranger who just needed somebody to listen to what they were going through. There was a theme to all of these things I began to see as I was living each day like it was a human day. I was living through everything and getting closer to 31 years, the day I died. I'm sitting here thinking, okay, all of these things involve love. Love was the answer. There was no judgment present. God did not judge me. Again, the Second Life Review. But love was the answer. It is the only thing that was important all through the Second Life Review. And we get to the very end, and God filled me this time with more unconditional love, with no judgment present, than I had been filled with at this point. I thought I couldn't take any more of the love. That's how great it was. I really thought I was going to burst. It was so incredible. I'm not judged. I'm now definitely not going home because I can't be separated from this. It felt like my natural life source, my God source, and there was nowhere I wanted to be. But the lessons continued, and God told me to look to my right. And this is when the lessons of the rippling effect happened. This is the only time that I saw God in any physical form that I was allowed to be able to visualize with my eyes. And I remember looking, and it was God's fingertips all the way up to his shoulder. And the best way I can describe it, it was about as big as like a semi-truck. And I remember his arm and watching, and his arm swung up high. And I remember looking up, and I could not see the top of his fingertips. It went past up into the stars. And I remember watching and waiting, and all of a sudden God put the palm of his hand down, and appeared in the palm of his hand a huge rock. You are the rock. You are the light. The light is of me, and I am with you. And as he said that, he let go of the rock, and we watched the rock begin to fall together. And it seemed like it took such a long time, and as we're watching this rock fall, I'm thinking, okay, I need to remember, I am the rock, I am the light, but the light is of God, and God is with me. And as I said that to myself, appeared out in front of me the largest body of water. I could not even see the borders of the water. And I watched as this rock got closer to the water, and finally it made one big impact that set off one ripple. And we stood together and we watched as that ripple, it grew and it grew and it grew and it grew till I couldn't even see the border of that single ripple. And God said to me, mankind is the water, you are the ripple. I couldn't even wrap my head around the magnitude of the message that God was trying to teach me at this time. God said, you are the ripple. Your thoughts, words, and actions will affect mankind as the ripple does the water. And I remember thinking over and over again about that lesson and watching how significant that single ripple was. how much impact it had. And knowing that that rock had caused it, and that rock had a light, and that light, it came from God, and it was the energy life force. I realized in that moment that it wasn't just about me, it was about each of us. Each of us are the rock. Each of us have that light. The light is from our Creator. It's up to us if we choose to shine that light or not. I didn't think I could handle anything else. I mean, this was so much information, and it was really important for me to remember it. And I thought we were done, but then God said to me, look again. So I had to look to my right again. And in front of me this time were these shelves, like bookshelves. And the shelves kept on going past stars and galaxies. And I remember looking behind me, and the shelves kept on going. And all of a sudden appeared gifts, presents like at Christmas time. And not one gift looked the same, not one. And God said to me, when you're born, I give each and every one of you gifts. I have more gifts for all of you. And all you have to do to get those gifts is ask. But then be quiet and listen.
And when I was experiencing this state of being, my mom finally made it home. So when my sister saw my mom, she said, Ingrid is there, and I cannot get her. This is another amazing thing. This is the synchronicities in life. My mom was a teacher, and she was trained CPR for children. So she knew exactly what to do. This is how life is so incredible, and is when we realize that everything meant to be the way it is. So my mom went into the tank and she pulled me out. She said that I was like a raggedy doll. She said that there was no pulse, I wasn't breathing, that my entire body was with no absolute color, my lips were blue. And she started to do what she knew to revive me. And at that moment, Craig, I was so disconnected, so detached from this dimension, from this body, from this reality, that I did not feel absolutely anything that she was doing to me. I just was in my space of bliss when I fell again in just a flash. There's nothing I could do. I was just falling, and I felt the sense that I was being vacuumed, pulled back into the body. And I knew I was back when all the feelings of coldness and discomfort, feeling the lack of freedom were back. And let me tell you, Craig, I was not a happy person.
At this point, God directed me to look to my left and down. And I looked down, and it was almost as if it was always in front of me, but I had never noticed it until that moment when God asked me to look. And there was planet Earth. And we were a significant distance away, and yet I had the ability to see. I could see my family, where they were at, my children, what they were doing. And that's when I had this knowing that, yes, I'm a mom, my kids are little, yes, technically the human side says they need me, I need to go back, but I was flooded with the knowledge and the wisdom that we're never separated. There is a bridge between heaven and earth, and we will always be with our loved ones. The physical is so limiting, and there's so much more. And having this feeling, it was incredible, and it just solidified that I knew I wasn't going to go back. I wanted to stay. This was the first and only time I felt this incredible amount of sadness, and it was coming from God. The best way I can try to put human words to the magnitude of sadness that God was feeling was, I haven't lost a child, but I can imagine. Sorry. My children are the most important thing to me, and this feeling of this tremendous amount of sadness from God was like losing a child, but times millions of children at once. The loss was that deep. I said to God, your children are okay, it's okay. Look, why are you sad? As if I was the expert telling God to look on the planet to see his children were okay. And as I said that, I go to look with God, and I see something I hadn't seen yet. Something was flickering off the planet, and so I remember trying to focus my vision more. And as soon as I did that, I could see that they were flames. And there was flames engulfing the planet. I started having this like a tremendous panic attack, because the first thing I thought of is my children are down there, my family, my loved ones are down there. God, help, what's happening? And as soon as I'm thinking this thought, appeared in front of me those glasses again. And I knew from the first time, I didn't have a choice to put the glasses on when they appeared. And so I remember thinking, I can't handle seeing more than what I'm seeing, and it didn't matter. As soon as I'm thinking that human thought, I felt my hands reaching for the glasses. I drawed them on my face once more, and then I had to look, and I looked, and this time with God's glasses on, what I saw was between the flames shooting off the earth, these silvery, white, almost luminescent life force souls, and they were lifting off unscathed in between the flames from planet Earth. They were coming up behind us on my left and into planet Heaven, which I knew was behind me. And as they would go by, I could feel the love energy that propelled them. It was the fuel. And I remember God still having that sadness feeling. It wasn't lifted. And here I was relieved, because I could feel people that I knew, my loved ones, going past me. And I knew it was heaven behind me. And I knew that's where I wanted to be. And that's where the love was. So I said, God, it's okay. It's okay. Look again. And that's when God said to me, Erica, it's free will. And I said, what do you mean it's free will? They're coming in. And God said, look. I looked again, and this time I saw past all the flames and the souls lifting off, and I saw at the core of the earth on the ground the souls that were not lifting off. I remember panicking and asking God, why can't you save them? Save them. Can't you save them too? And God said to me, Erica, it's free will. Hand in hand with the gift of life, I give free will. And I understood that this meant that God loved not some of us, but each and every one of us so much that it was the greatest gift paired with life to choose, to let us choose if we wanted to have that love connection with our Creator. As a parent, you think you know what's best for your children. And we are God's children, but yet God loved us so much that he gave us that gift to choose, and didn't say, you have to love me, you have to choose me. It was choosing the love connection. And the souls that had not lifted off had chose to not have that love connection. So the sadness that I was feeling was for the ones that were, left behind. As soon as we got done seeing that, I felt my attention directed to this was now the first time that I was going to be able to turn around. The whole time we had these lessons, and in heaven, I knew that heaven was behind me, but my focus needed to be in front. And so this was the first time that I was told I could turn. And as I turn around, it's so hard to put into human words, because really, can't think of anything that's gives it the justice, the magnitude it deserves, but heaven was a planet. And it was so big in comparison to the earth that the earth is like a speck of dust in size. As soon as I'm seeing this, I have this natural propulsion to want to just start running to heaven, to catch up to the other souls, if you will. They had already gone in. And I thought the lessons were over, and the feelings that I had felt, that unconditional love of not having separation with our Creator anymore and knowing that I was home, I really didn't think it would be possible to send me back. So I remember feeling like I was starting to run to heaven and being frozen in my tracks. And God said, "Wait a minute, child. You're not staying. You're not staying, child. You work for me now, remember?" And I had remembered in those days leading up to my death, that contract that I made with God, that if God would let me live and help me heal and get healthy again, I would work for God. I would do anything. And God held me to it. I didn't think He was watching, but He was.
When I came back, it was clear that I had an awareness I did not have before. When I started to see my parents, I didn't even feel them as my parents, I felt them as my equal. I also had experienced the sense of oneness. So for me, that was sense of equality. And the other thing, for me, seeing this body was the sense I am not that child. I couldn't even relate with other children because to me it was like, what is happening with these people? They don't know anything. The other thing, I came with abilities I did not have before. Right after my near-death experience, I could read, I could write, I could resolve mathematical problems, I could put together complex puzzles. So this was something incredible. And even later in school, the more these abilities were developing, I was like, wow, I'm not learning anything. I don't need to learn anything. I am just remembering. There was also abilities for me that at the moment I didn't know they were something different because I didn't know the difference with other people. But later on I realized that I could see auras, I could see beings of light, so I could see things other people couldn't see. I could communicate. I could also, later on in my life, when I was 6 years old, I started to see what we call spirits. Since I was 4 years old, I started to have visions of the future. So throughout my life, I knew which career I was going to pick. At 9, I knew who I was going to marry. At 12, the places where I was going to work. So I could smell things that were not here. I could see, taste, hear, feel. So yeah, I had all these abilities, and through time I discovered other people did not. All of us have them, but through time and conditioning, people lose them because we're told that is not true. But for me, since I was this clean canvas from the beginning, that was the natural state of my being, and it was just through time realizing others don't have them manifested like I do. It's been present in my life through my entire life, Greg. To be free from the fear of death, because I realized that there is not death. We are eternal beings. I was so little when I already knew that I was eternal and that I had come and gone many times, wearing many different costumes.
And before I could argue my case to stay with God in heaven, because I couldn't fathom He was sending me back, I remember feeling like I was pushed from the top of my head down into that tunnel, the tunnel that I had come up in to heaven. But this time, the tunnel was completely different. This time, the tunnel was completely confining. And I felt like I only had space to keep my hands by my sides. I was standing upright and it was completely dark. There was no light present. And I didn't feel that love, sustaining connection, that energy force, that life force like I did when I was coming up. It was empty and I felt alone for the first time in this whole experience. I started slowing down in the tunnel. And I remember thinking, okay, I can't see anything. That's one of my senses. I can't feel anything because I can't move. I'm stuck and I'm coming to a stop. And it was like this paralyzing panic. And all of a sudden, I have that realization. I hear this buzzing noise. It sounded like white noise, like on a TV screen. And I thought, okay, this is the only sense I have. I'm gonna try to pay attention and get help. I'm stuck somewhere and I need to get back down to earth because God said I have this mission, I gotta get down there. I have no idea where I'm at. And I remember paying attention, and as I started paying attention to that buzzing noise, it started getting louder and louder. And as it got louder, it started pulling me out of the tunnel. And I went from standing up out of the tunnel to flat on my back with my hands still at my side. And I remember floating to some distance. It's still completely dark. I can't see anything. There's no stars, nothing. And then I come to a stop and I'm hovering. And as I'm hovering, that buzzing noise starts turning to this muffled, like garbled murmur times hundreds and hundreds of people. Negativity, there was loathing, self-loathing, there was anger, there was hatred. There was so much energy draining feeling that I felt if I listened, if I was around this conversation any longer, that I would start getting sucked into it and my life force would be drained. And as soon as I had that feeling, I was panicking because I didn't feel God in this whole experience. As soon as I had that feeling, all I could do is cry out to God. It was a telepathic communication again. And I remember saying, God, help me. I love you. I didn't understand what was going on, especially after everything that had just happened to me in heaven. As soon as I cried out and I made that love, heartfelt connection to God, my light turned on in me, and I was the only light in the whole place. And as it illuminated everything, I could see below me. I was just hovering within inches of all these people, and they were miserable in this pit, and they could see me, and they started grabbing at me. And I remember feeling all the detail, like their fingers. There was big hands, there were small hands, there were strong hands, weak, and I could feel them grabbing on, trying to pull me down. I panicked, and all I could do is cry out to God, God, help me, I love you, please help me. And I felt like if I would have spent another moment there, all my life force would have been drained out. I was in the edge of hell. And so for the rest of the time, which felt like forever, getting back down to planet Earth, I spent having this communication with God. I love you, God. Thank you so much for loving me. And it was that force, again, that fuel that sustained me, that propelled me back down to Earth, where I found myself eventually on the emergency room ceiling, looking down at my lifeless shell of a body and not wanting to go in, but having no choice at this point. The next morning, I was greeted by my attending physician, and he came in and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Mackenzie. How are you this morning?" Well, it was so early in the morning, I was still the only person in my room. And as he came over to the bedside to start doing the health assessment for me, I remember reaching for this pink little bedpan. And I knew I was going to throw up. I couldn't even contain it. And as I'm reaching for it, it was my voice. And it just came out of me. There was no filter. And it was, doctor, oh my gosh, I have to tell you what happened to me. I've just been with God. I've been in heaven. I've had all these lessons. I had life reviews. And I just was trying to tell him what happened. He's the first person. And the poor guy, I don't blame him at all, but I literally watched all the color just left his face. He didn't even do the health assessment. I was still trying to talk to him, and he left the room immediately. A little nurse, she was so sweet, she came in, she had been charting on me in the hallway. She shut the door and she came over and she sat on the bedside and she said, "I just heard everything that you said to that doctor. And I need to tell you, and I need you to be quiet and listen." That's a common theme for me. I was told that so many times through this entire experience. I've worked for that doctor for 7 years. And I'm so sorry, child, because I believe you. I know where you've been. But the first person that you told about your experience to heaven and with God is an atheist. When the doctor had returned, he returned with the nurse later and they medicated me. And it was determined then that I probably had had some sort of chemical imbalance, nervous breakdown, a late set of bipolar disorder, which at 31 years old, female is very rare. And because I shared that experience, there's this fine line that happened looking back of the doctor taking that information and putting his maybe bias feelings of how he maybe felt about the afterlife and dismissing it as crazy. And so I was checked into a psychiatric ward and medicated at one point up to 12 different medications for talking about the experience I had. And I learned really fast that the more I shared, and I felt like it was a safe environment, the more medications that I was on. So I learned pretty quickly, it was a learning curve for me, not to talk about this, to deny this experience so that I could get out.
So I was a 38-year-old college professor, and I was an atheist. In my teen years, because of all the things that were taking place in my family and in the culture, this is back in the 60s, the mid-60s, it was just made no sense to go to church. Church was boring, it was silly, it was archaic. I became a modern person, someone who believed in science. If you can see it, touch it, measure it, it's real. And if you can't, it's superstition, it's nonsense, it's silly. And by the time I was 17 and went to college and took a philosophy class with an atheist, I had become a full-blown atheist. And I was interested in my career. I was interested in my own gratification of my pleasures, and I didn't really care that much about other people. It was the most acute pain I'd ever experienced in my life. I'd been in accidents, I'd been hospitalized before, but this was way over the top. When it hit, I thought I'd been shot by a bullet in the center of my abdomen. It dropped me to the ground, thrashing, screaming, hollering, and in terror because I didn't know what was going on. My wife called the desk at the hotel, and they called an emergency service. A very nice doctor came, got me up off the floor, examined me. Within minutes, he knew exactly what was wrong and told me that I had to have surgery immediately or I would die. I was parked in a room. Unfortunately, there was no doctor available because it was a Saturday, no surgeon available, so I was never under the care of a doctor. I was given no medication whatsoever, and I was left that way for 10 hours. The pain went from, I thought the top of my head was going to blow off because of the pain. It was incredibly difficult to believe. to worse and worse and worse because the hydrochloric acid and digestive juices and enzymes and bacteria and all that good stuff that dissolves your food was now dissolving me. And it went from my groin up to my neck. So it was just like a wall of pain. I couldn't talk, I couldn't think, I couldn't do anything except I was very focused on breathing because I was terrified of dying, because I knew that when you died it was all over. I was 38 years old, things were going pretty well for me, and I didn't want to die, and I kept wondering, this can't be happening, this can't be real, why is this happening to me? Very upsetting is that I noticed that in the bed that I had occupied was a piece of meat, and when I looked at the face of that dead piece of meat, it looked exactly like me. But being a rational human being, I knew that it wasn't me because I was standing there looking at it, and you can't be standing over yourself looking at yourself. That's impossible. But it was very confusing because I knew that that thing had been me, but it wasn't me. And yet I was more alive than I've ever been in my whole life. I had died, and because I didn't have any theological background at all, or religious background at all, as an adult, I thought that I'd gone down the sewer pipe of the universe into the cesspool. And that I was being processed into becoming the raw sewage that these other people had become. So that's when I knew that I wasn't coming back to this world ever again.
When I was a senior in college at the University of Texas, I had a head-on collision. This accident broke my back in 3 places, and I was waiting desperately for an ambulance. Be calm, be very still. I think that you have a very bad injury and they're going to need to put you on a board and you're going to be taken to the ER. And so she held my hand in those moments, and I felt as if she was the Good Samaritan I'd been waiting for. It was terrifying. I was agnostic at the time, so when I think of the prayer that I said at that moment, it was more like a foxhole prayer. I looked up at the sky and I said, God, if there's a God, help me out of this situation. I have no control. Everything was out of my control. What surgeon I would get, how this would all play out. I was 22 and had grown up poor, so I didn't think about getting health insurance. When I waited in that ER, I knew my back was broken. I'd had a CAT scan and several MRIs, and yet they would not give me any painkillers because they needed a surgeon to sign off and say that they were taking me into surgery. So I was in enormous pain. The physical pain was unbelievable. And I would scream and cry, and eventually I just ran out of energy. And I remember saying a lot of choice words when I heard that this one surgeon was not going to operate on me. I heard nurses talking about it, and he refused to come in because he said that he didn't want to operate on someone who didn't have health insurance. And that hit me so hard. I thought, here I am trying to struggle in this world, trying to get to that next level, and someone doesn't care about me. I'm just money. It terrified me. Well, an off-duty surgeon came by. She had been on duty for a long time, and I grabbed her arm and I said, look, this is serious. If I can't walk, I do not think I will have a long life. I'll probably kill myself. This is horrible. And because at that time I had lost feeling in my leg. When they were touching my toes, I could not feel them. And I knew what this meant. I knew this meant that, my spine was compromised. So eventually she went home had dinner, came back, and took me into surgery. And I remember signing that form, and it said 17% chance of death. And I thought, that's oddly specific, but I'm young, and what does it matter? I will sign this form because I really hope I come out of this surgery and can walk. When I was wheeled into surgery, the last thing I expected was for my spirit form to leave my body. But at some point during that surgery, probably midway through, my spirit left my body, and I saw that my back was opened up, very long incision. I'd completely shattered T10, 11, and 12. They just were non-existent, and they were picking the bone fragments out of my spine. I was in absolute awe. The way I describe it is I felt like exactly like myself, but in spirit form and kind of above the surgeon. So I was looking down at them as they were working on me, and I was amazed at how much blood there was. That was my first thought. It looked like something from the Civil War. It just looked gruesome. And I remember thinking, is there something wrong? Should there be this much blood? And yet, at the same time, being an agnostic going into surgery, I was thrilled. I knew this consciousness to be something that survives death. I knew that I felt smarter, clearer, more intense outside of body. And then the most amazing thing happened. There were these very large beings. I didn't call them angels at first. I didn't know what they were. They were light beings about 9 feet tall, 8, 9 feet tall. But immediately I was stunned. I knew that they were intelligent and powerful and there to calm me down. So when they sent this light into my spirit form, I calmed down, I felt at ease. I knew that this spirit form is more important than the body that I was observing on the table. And they told me, though, that I would walk, I would be fine, everything would be okay, and they were almost playful. They spoke with telepathy. These words came right at me, and the words were, "Watch this." And when they said this, they sent beams of light through the backs of the doctors, through their hands, and my whole spine and my whole body lit up with this light. And I knew this light to be healing, intelligence, communication, and that they were assisting the doctors. But what amazed me was that angels worked through the surgeons. And I had enough of an awareness or a knowing to realize that the two surgeons didn't know this. And I realized it, and I thought, I want to take that with me. Maybe angels can work through me. Maybe these beings can work through all of us. Maybe they do, and we're not aware of it. So that was really my first lesson in the near-death experience. But at that moment, the monitor flatlined. And I have talked with anesthesiologists later, but I know that that's probably a nightmare when someone's back is opened up and they have to be revived. So I had this idea that I'd have to be flipped over, and there was already so much blood, and I did not want to see that. My spirit form knew that it could leave the hospital, and it left the operating room, and it simply just went into a hallway. I ended up in this hallway where I saw my stepdad. My mother had remarried when I was in college, and I didn't know him that well. I only knew him as this fastidious person who cared a lot about health, and he would make fun of people who ate candy or Cokes or anything that was not healthy. Well, I saw him at a vending machine getting a Snickers bar, and I thought, that's funny. He usually, only eats an apple as a snack or carrots. And I thought maybe he has a secret sugar addiction. And that's all that I thought in that moment.
After I was torn apart by the people in that place and prayed and called out to Jesus, He came and healed me, restored me back to my wholeness and loved me and embraced me and carried me upward like a helicopter ride. And we started moving more and more rapidly, and I knew we were traveling at a great speed through space. And I was trying to get my composure together because I was crying like I'd never cried before out of joy of being embraced by him and being loved by him. And I looked up and we were headed towards what I first thought was a galaxy, and then I realized that it wasn't a galaxy of stars, it was a galaxy of beings very, very big. I mean, seriously, billions and trillions of beings coming and going in this great center of light. And then I felt even greater love coming from this galaxy. And I thought to myself, oh, that's where God is. And I thought to myself, he's made a terrible mistake. I'm garbage. He should put me back where I was. And with that, we stopped outside this galaxy, which I'll now refer to as heaven. And he spoke to me for the first time telepathically and said, we don't make mistakes. You belong here. The thing that is interesting about my experience is that when I died, I was carrying my knowledge and perception and experience of my body with me. When I was with Jesus, I realized that that was all changing, and I was becoming more like the angels, which is, instead of being opaque and heavy, I was getting, at first, light emitting and becoming more and more transparent. I still had the shape, but I was beginning to see into and through myself, and I wasn't seeing blood vessels and nerves and bones and sinew and tendons. I was seeing these wonderful colors of light. So I was becoming a light being like the angels were, but most importantly, I was emitting light, not an opaque being that only absorbed light. I was amazed and delighted with my expanded vision. When I went up near heaven and into heaven with Jesus, something very interesting happened. I began to see colors that I've never experienced before. And as an artist and one who taught color theory like practically every semester to the students, which is pretty simple when you break it down, cones and rods. The cones pick up 3 different wavelengths of light, and the primary colors, the secondary colors, and tertiary colors. So I'm trying to figure this all out with all these colors that I had no name for and had never experienced before. And I realized that there's no way I was going to figure it all out. Lots and lots of beautiful colors that I don't have words for. And the weird thing is, when I go to the art supply store and buy pigments so that I can make those colors, they don't sell them. There are multi-dimensions. And so the real space travel is moving dimensionally from one vibratory state into a different universe altogether. It's not really going great distances so much as it is moving through different states of being. And I believe, as theoretical physicists believe, and as Jesus told me, that there's many different universes all operating with different physical laws in different states. I was far away from Earth, but not as we know time and space. I was in a different plane of existence, which is both far and close at the same time. I know that sounds strange, but these things do not meet our linear understanding of time and space, which is how we operate, and it works well for us here, but it's not the only reality. When Jesus took me out to the outskirts of heaven, he called forth a group of angels, and he said they've recorded my life and they wanted to show it to me. And we went through my life from my birth up until before I died. And it started off really fun in my childhood, and then as the family dissonance began to develop in my early adolescence into my teenage years, I withdrew emotionally because it was very painful to be engaged with my family, extremely painful. So I withdrew and became detached, just cared about myself for self-preservation. They were not happy with how that all went, and not happy with how I tried to live my mature life, which was take care of my own needs and not worry about anybody else. They weren't judging me, they were just expressing their great sorrow and disappointment. And it felt terrible, frankly, to be such a disappointment to these people who had been so kind and loving towards me, that I had utterly failed them. When Jesus told me that I had to come back to this world and try and live it the way that I had been created in the first place to live, which is living lovingly, kindly, compassionately, putting other people's needs and interests ahead of my own. I was willing to give that a try, but I wanted to go to heaven because Jesus had given me a tour of heaven, and heaven is the most interesting, wonderful, exciting place in the universe because you can't begin to describe heaven. In fact, in truth, everything that's good, that ever was, that ever will be, and that is in heaven. And that would be worth exploring for the next billion times a billion times a billion years. And becoming familiar with all that goodness and all that love. And of course, the ultimate centerpiece of heaven is God. And that is the goal of every being in heaven, is to ultimately go into proximity and complete union with God. Jesus having shown me that, I thought I was ready, and he told me, no, you got to come back to this world. We had a big argument, and he convinced me ultimately that it would be in my best interest to do this thing called life in this world and do it to the best of my ability.
As I was leaving the hospital, I was in the night sky above Austin, and it was beautiful. I just felt so free, the way a bird would feel flying over the sky, and I started feeling my soul merge and connect with everyone I had known. And I wanted to simply say to everyone at the soul level, even if it was a barista at a coffee shop and this person had simply handed me a coffee, I just wanted to say, have a great life, enjoy it, be happy, I wish you well, I might be leaving this place. And it was just my way of going, hey, I love you. And that's all there really is. Like at that soul level, any bitterness or any pain or anything that that we think we are attached to, we're not attached to at that soul level. And I realized that in that moment. Then the night sky transitioned into what looked like outer space. There were a ton of stars, and I just seemed to be floating in the universe. I started to hear different messages coming from a light that was far away. I didn't feel alone or scared. I felt free and supported. And one of the first messages I heard was, love is all that matters and all that we take with us. And again, it was communicated in that form of telepathy, this light simply coming through me and connecting with me. And I thought, okay, that's a pretty simple message, but the angels told me I'm coming back. Maybe you need to give me something a little more than that. That may not be enough for me to bring back to humanity. And I heard, remind them to go to nature. And then I heard the words, be like a little child. As I got closer to this light, which to me seemed like divine intelligence, peace, I began to know that the light wanted me to see different parts of my life. And my life was displayed up in the stars in this beautiful way. And one of the lessons about remind them to go to nature is God showed me when I was a kid and I prayed in nature. I was raised religious, and so I went to this briar patch and there were a lot of rabbits, and I was maybe 5 years old, and I still wondered about God. It was that type of kid who thought, I don't like this religion. I don't like the idea of children starving in Africa and going to hell, or great Buddhist monks being judged simply because they're not Christian. Like, my mind did not gel with that. So I had problems with God as a kid, and my mom said, well, go pray and maybe God will give you a sign. I went to this briar patch and I sat in a cross-legged position, and I was probably about 5 or 6, and I said, God, I want some rabbits to come to me if you exist. And so I stayed there in this briar patch, and the rabbits came to me very slowly. They were baby rabbits. God said, that was good. You know, that was a good moment. You opened your heart. You weren't afraid to pray. You weren't afraid to be in nature. You weren't afraid to connect. What I saw later was a moment that embarrassed me a little bit. I was 22 and kind of judgmental in college. I wasn't a bad person, but if people didn't like the same movies or the same documentaries, or if they didn't wear cool shoes, or they were older than me and I was a college student, then I really didn't have a lot of time for them, and I wasn't very nice. So there was a couple that I worked with at one of the restaurants where I worked, and they were older than me, in their 30s, and they were Catholic, and they tried to be my friend. They were a married couple, and I just didn't have time for them. I really blew them off and never communicated with them at work, and God showed me their souls and their hearts and how I made them sad at times. And then God showed me, and this makes me almost want to cry when I talk about it. They went home and they prayed for me, for my health, for my wealth, for my life, and they actually cared about me. And I didn't have the time of day for them because of the shoes they wore, and I felt like such an idiot. I felt like this just small being for treating other people badly, especially when I saw how great their souls were. And I thought, okay, when I come back, I will look at people in a different way. I will not judge them in a materialistic way. I won't judge them by their age or how they look. I will look at their hearts. I'll look at their souls. I'll really figure out who people are. And I wanted another chance to do that. I wanted to be better because that moment really hit me. So the moments where I was perhaps not good to myself and drank too much, partied too much in college, I wasn't held to a cross for that. It was being rude to other people. That was really what God was saying. Don't do that. Don't look at other people and judge them. And look for the good in this world and other people. So that lesson was profound for me. And then I transitioned. After that, my spirit form was moving towards something which looked like heaven. And in this space, what it looked like to me was nature. And it looked like a holding place. It did not look like, okay, now I've transitioned into this paradise. This looked like a place where you waited for something else, and that's what it felt like to me. But the grass was very, very green, and what stood out to me is that nothing was dead. Everything was 100% alive. So you can walk out into nature and you might see a branch that's fallen off a tree or a little dead part in the grass, but all of this grass in this place sung with joy, almost as if there was, instead of wind, it was almost as if it swayed with life. Then in that place, I saw my grandfather. He was the only person who was dead at that time. And he's another link in my past to the other side because he wanted me to believe in God and he wanted me to know that I was loved. So when he died when I was 10, he spent a lot of time writing stories to me about his life and praying with me and talking with me, and I was his only granddaughter. I meant a lot to him. So when I saw him, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked about 35 or so. His jaw was the same, this square jaw, but his eyes shone with this beauty, this light. He said, "Do you want to continue on?" And I knew that continue on meant go toward God. And God looked like this bright yellow light. And yet I was thrilled. I was excited. I thought, there's no way I can't not go towards God. I've always been an adventurous soul in life. I started flying towards God, and I felt people's prayers trying to hold me back. And the way prayers felt, they felt like an energy or a wind. This energy or wind seemed to be pulling my spirit backwards, but I broke through it. I could hear every word that everyone was saying. So some prayers were full of love and adoration and hope. Some prayers were tormented and afraid. I had one aunt who had lost her daughter in a car wreck, and her daughter was in her 20s, and she was beseeching God, almost screaming, saying, "God, don't do this. Someone else in the family can't lose a daughter. It's too hard. It's too hard. Don't let Trisha die." And she was almost commanding God. And I thought, oh, that's silly. I'm fine over here. You don't understand. It'll all be better later if I don't come back. Because as I was getting farther away from my body and from that place, I felt that I didn't want to come back, and the prayers just seemed simple to me. That's the only way to describe it. I just thought, oh, you don't understand. Once you're here, you'll understand, and it's not that big of a deal, because time is relative, and the way I looked at it from that point of view is, oh, soon enough, you'll be here with me. And that was the overall feeling. So I broke through their prayers, and it just didn't matter to me. I heard my mom's prayers, my dad's prayers. I didn't understand love. I'd had a few broken relationships, and what I understood was working hard and being successful. I did not understand love. And as I got closer to that light of God, for the first time, I felt okay. It's so hard to describe, but what I felt was, oh, I can breathe. I can just be at peace. I can be safe. There's no one here who's going to harm me. There's no one here who's going to say something that's going to hurt my soul. I'm loved. I'm okay exactly the way I am. In fact, I'm better than okay. I'm amazing the way I am, and God loves me so much. That love is shocking. You just can't believe how good it is. And that's how my soul felt. I never wanted to return. I wanted to feel more and more of that energy. And God's love was like an atomic bomb of energy. And I started to feel different. I started to feel like more expanded, larger than I was. I started to feel at peace. And I wanted to go closer and closer and closer to God. At that point in my near-death experience, I did not want to return. That love was better than any romantic feeling, than any parental love I'd ever experienced. It was perfect. It was perfection. And in that place, as I tried to go a little bit farther, I hit a wall or a barrier. And many near-death experiencers talk about this. There's a place where you're stopped at some point, and at the stopping point, God's voice boomed through me, and it's a very powerful voice. I don't know if it's masculine or feminine, but it just is a powerful booming voice, and God said, "Look down." And then it's as if from this vantage point I was looking down to earth, and I saw all these souls, and I knew that they were souls, even though they were encased in bodies and they were walking along a particular river. And God said, look at them. And some of them were composed of light and some of them had darkness around them. In that place, I understood the darkness to simply mean fear, depression, anger, anything that blocks us from God. It didn't look terrifying. I didn't think about the fact that people from a place of darkness can commit acts of horror and crimes. I didn't think about that. I just thought, there's a little bit of darkness and they just need to be reminded of God. It looked simple. Like my only purpose was to go back there and remind people that they can be connected to God. And then God said something that disturbed me. God said I was going to go back to Earth and I was going to work as a teacher. Not necessarily as a spiritual teacher, but as an actual teacher. All this light that I had been, this expansive, beautiful light, it was as if it was crumpled up into a ball and thrown, as if you would throw a baseball or a softball, and I was hurling through time, space, back towards my physical form. I was enveloped in this darkness, and it was terrifying in many ways to experience beauty like that, and then to be forced back into a very painful body.
No transition. I was back in the body, back in the bed, back in the pain, and immediately nurse came into the room. This was now 9 o'clock at night, approximately 10 hours or so from when this began, and she said a doctor has arrived at the hospital on Saturday night, and then I'm going to have the surgery, and they prepped me for surgery, and I had the surgery at 10 o'clock that night. I wanted to tell my wife what had happened to me. The Sunday morning, the very day that I had the surgery, because the surgery went into Sunday morning, and I tried to tell her things, and she did not want to hear it. Every day thereafter, I would tell her things, and then she would tell me to stop talking about it. She told me it didn't happen. Get over it. It was just a dream. It never happened, etc. And I would tell her, no, this happened, but Jesus said this, and Jesus did that, and God wants this, etc. And she didn't like it. After my experience, I became more and more committed to telling everybody. So when the cleaning lady came into my hospital, I was in the hospital for several months. I came back to the U.S. and was very, very sick, on death's door for months. And anyways, anybody that came in the room, nurses, doctors, cleaning people, respiratory therapists, whatever, I would tell them about Jesus and God and heaven and hell and stuff like that. And I found out several years later from one of the nurses that I was the laughingstock of the hospital, and I was getting visitors from all over the hospital because I was the crazy person on the third floor of the southwest wing of that hospital. But I knew that they were laughing at me, but I would tell them anyways. After many months, I was losing my wife, my kids. Nobody was visiting me. People that came to visit me and I gave my testimony to never came back. I realized that I had to stop forcing it on people. So my policy ever since then has been, I don't tell my story unless people ask about it. After the experience, I had the ability, basically all the time, to see into what's called the supernatural world. I could see demons, and I could see angels. I could feel people's feelings empathetically to a very intense degree, and sometimes I could actually kind of hear their thoughts. And I was also getting glimpses of things that were going to happen in the future. It was all quite overwhelming, and much of that I prayed to God to take away from me after several months of that, because I was not connecting with this world. It was weird because I kind of had one foot in the supernatural world and one foot in this world, and it was really bad for my interactions with the people that I was around. Ever since I came back into this world, I've tried to be kinder, more compassionate, and more loving. I think that it's God's plan for everybody that we love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves, and I'm trying to live up to that. I fail all the time. I try to examine what I've done and pray that I'm forgiven for when I fail or don't live up to what God expects of me. And I know that it pleases God when I make my own simple little opportunities to make this world a better place by being kind and compassionate and loving. And so that's it in a nutshell, is I want to live a life pleasing to God, which is to love.
I was conscious about the time they were asking me to say my name and to swallow a few ice chips, and I could not say my actual name. I remember saying, yes, I remember her name. Her name is Trisha. And they said, no, that's your name, so you need to say what your name is. And I refused for a little bit, and the nurse was confused as to why I was arguing with her. But I felt as if my consciousness was greater than this form. And to come back to me was disappointing. I didn't feel grateful at first. I felt disappointed that I had experienced all of that expansiveness, all of that bliss, all of that beauty, and now I had to be me and walk through this life as me with my particular upbringing, my traumas, my pain, my memories of life on this earth, and yet bring in that consciousness of the other side. So eventually I relented and said, okay, I'm Trisha. In the ER, I was constantly pulling nurses aside, asking them if they knew God. Many of them were religious, and they said, yes, I pray, I believe in God. But then I knew I was interacting with people in a way that they didn't fully understand. I would tell the nurses, oh, God's this amazing energy. It's so amazing. I was just there. I got to meet God, and God filled me with all this love. And I would see people backing away and saying, different things about me, even my own family. I was very different from that point forward. I look back at my life and who I was at 22 before that accident. I was very contained and fearful within my own body, and I kept a lot of people away from me with that exterior that I had. After the near-death experience, I was like a child. I was bubbly and joyful and grateful for every step that I took on this planet, grateful for every bite of food that I had. I felt this enormous optimism. When I was there in that realm, it seemed as if everybody would just be there in a few seconds. Or it could be many years, but it seemed that soon. It seemed as if life would just complete very quickly. It was a grain of sand over there because time had been going on for so long. There had possibly been many lives that I had lived and others had lived, and it was just, from the beginning, it looked like theater. Like this looked like a theater production. That was my first thought when my spirit form stepped out of body, as I thought, this is the reality, and this physical thing that we take all too seriously, it's not that important. This spirit is what is important. This is what's eternal. This is what goes on. This is what matters. And how do we forget? How do we deny that it even exists as I had? I denied that there was this possibility. I denied my own soul until I experienced it in that realm. And that was part of what blew me away, is how seriously we take this and how we don't take the spiritual realm seriously enough.
My 4 guests have seen things that I believe we may have forgotten about. A core theme that resonated with my guest was how we treated others during this incarnation. A rich, poor, smart, or illiterate, it seems to be irrelevant. But what is important is the way they acted. This performance is reflected in our life review right after we transition. Now, what really is the life review? To me, it's an accurate record of how we reacted to the situations in our life, an opportunity to see where we can improve. This is Craig McMahon saying goodbye, and that love is the way to our evolution.